Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to thank you for joining us for today's nonprofit collaboration, Shared Authority and Partnerships with Omar Eaton-Martinez. The workshop is brought to you today by Mid-America's Art Alliance's Engage program and the Texas Association of Museums. Please remember to keep your microphones muted until prompted by the hosts. And if you have any questions, please drop them in the chat for a Q&A at the end. Now, if there is, I would imagine, depending on Omar's presentation, there may be a moment where he will ask for a response. And so please feel free to respond at that point, either vis-a-vis the chat or the raise a hand thingy. I can't remember the word for it, but to make yourself known to him with that question. We will have links to the websites, mailing lists, and newsletters in the chat as well. And we have closed captions in both English and Spanish. For Spanish closed captions, please see the link in the chat. And this same link will also allow for you to adjust the size, color, and contrast changes as needed. And I'd like to just take a moment and thank Total Captions for their services today. A little bit about Mid-America. We are an organization that strengthens and supports artists, cultural organizations, and communities throughout the region and beyond. As a nonprofit regional arts organization, we represent Arkansas, Kansas, Missouri, Nebraska, Oklahoma, and Texas, and we focus on strengthening communities and improving lives through extraordinary cultural experiences. One of the programs of Mid-America Arts Alliance, which is presenting this program for you today, is called Engage. The Engage program provides community-centered professional and organizational development that focuses on leadership training for small to mid-sized arts and cultural organizations. Using a combination of workshop, coach consultations, and peer-to-peer learning activities and opportunities, Engage works with participants to govern more effectively, become more fiscally astute, and develop strategies to address community needs. And the community needs Omar Eaton-Martinez. Thank you, Karis, for putting that in because that was delightful. Our partner for today's workshop is the Texas Association of Museums, also known as TAM. TAM is a nonprofit 501c3 organization established to provide a network among museums to improve the level of professionalism within the museum community and to encourage and use and enjoy the museums of all Texans and to serve as an information clearinghouse for and about museums. Finally, TAM also serves as a liaison between museums and museums-related agencies and organizations. I realize I'm presenting a lot of information, but in the spirit of shared partnership and authority, it's important to make sure that we introduce all of our partners. And now for the moment you all have been waiting for. Our presenter, Omar Eaton-Martinez, leads the Prince George's County Historical Resources in the Natural and Historical Resources Division for the Maryland National Capital Parks and Planning Division. That's a mouthful, and I imagine that you might offer a little deeper reading on that. This includes historical house museums, an aviation museum, the Black History Program, and archaeological parks. He administers the program of those sites with an emphasis on preserving, sustaining, and enhancing these resources, as well as engaging and building communities through education, outreach, and innovation. Most recently, Eaton-Martinez managed the Interns and Fellows program at the Smithsonian's National Museum of American History. Additionally, he is also an Alliance of American Museums Facing Change Senior Fellow and on the board of the Association of African American Museums. So impressive. So I won't take another moment of your time. I'd like to invite all of you to welcome Omar Eaton-Martinez, who will make his presentation today. Thank you, Omar.
Oh, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for that introduction. Very thankful to be invited by Dr. Willits and Karis Adams and representing the Mid-America Arts Alliance, as well as a partnership with the Texas Association of Museums. I'm really ecstatic and excited to be with you this afternoon. I'm going to share with you a PowerPoint in a few moments, but I did want to take some time to kind of expand on a little bit what Dr. Willis will share with you about my background. The organization that I primarily work with, the Maryland National Park Planning Commission. It is a mouthful. It is almost 100 years old commission. It'll be 100 in 2027. It's a commission that really partners with the two counties that border Washington, D.C., which are Montgomery County and Prince George's County, but is also connected to our state legislature. And it covers a lot of ground from parks, planning, recreation, but obviously historic sites, arts, and culture as well. And so I work for the Department of Parks and Recreation, Prince George's County, which is probably the largest department within the commission. And I work for the NHRD division, which is nature centers, historic sites, and the like. So what I do is I help and support the managers who run these groundbreaking, transforming sites in Prince George's County. I have sites that are historic house museums that cover a lot of histories from enslavement to different types of labor history. We have sites that focus on the Black experience writ large. We have the Black History Program that has 3 different sites on its own, actually 4 different sites now, because we're about to open a new one next year. I also have the archaeology unit under me. So the archaeologists have sort of a county-wide compliance, as well as run 4 different parks, archaeological parks, and 1 paleontological park. We have 1 park called Dinosaur Park. And we also have our own aviation museum, which is really the only unit that has this in a building that was built and designed to be a museum, whereas the other ones are really based off historical structures and archaeological spaces within the county. And I am a senior fellow for the American Alliance of Museums Facing Change, which I get to support the great work of 3 museums in Mississippi. One is the Museum of Mississippi Delta. The other one is the International Museum of Muslim Cultures. And the third is the Mississippi Department of Archives and History, which is really a lot like the organization I work for, where they have oversight over many different museums, including the Mississippi History Museum and the Mississippi Civil Rights Museum. And so that's some of the work that I get to do. And I'm really excited to talk about shared authority. So I'm going to take a moment to see if I can share my screen with you successfully. Give me 1 second. All right. So what I like to start off with when I discuss almost anything is just my positionality. And I think it's really important for us to be as present and as honest as we can about who we are and what we bring to the table, not just professionally, but personally, because those things all add to our lens and how we see the world, which obviously is going to impact how we partner with people. So my positionality is that I am a cisgendered Black male who has parents who came from the beautiful island of Puerto Rico. They came here in the 60s to work. My father was recruited to work at NASA Goddard Space Flight Center as an engineer. My mother came and worked in one of the first bilingual schools in DC public schools. I was raised in Silver Spring, Maryland. And I was born in DC, raised in Silver Spring, Maryland, and was able to attend school in College Park and Clark Atlanta University. And now I'm back in College Park doing my PhD work right now in American Studies. One of the things I also wanted to share is that, you know, I am a married man. I have 4 children. As you can see behind me, you see a lot of different things. That's our homeschool. We homeschool our kids, right? So all of those things make up my positionality, and they really add and impact my lens and how I see the world. And it creates this beautiful kaleidoscope of how we see the world. But at the end of the day, as intersectional as all we all have sort of our blind spots and capacities that we have to acknowledge and continue to grow on. And again, that is something that I always think really drives how I partner with people, because it allows me to really be sensitive about who is coming to the table that hopefully we're setting together, as well as how do we give each other voice and agency. And so at this point, I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I'm going to ask that they share a poll. So I want to hear from you guys now and try to figure out how you guys identify. I didn't get as deep, because I think there's 3 questions on this poll that kind of dig into race, gender, and age. It's completely anonymous, but it just kind of gives us a feel of who's in our virtual room here. So hopefully we'll be able to get it up. Here you go. So if you can go ahead and fill that out, and then we can kind of see who's in the space, who's in the place, and hopefully start to build community with each other as we learn and talk about shared authority and partnerships.
Don't think I didn't see the Vanilla Ice reference to the title of your poll, Omar.
I did no such thing. I give that
Allegedly.
credit all to Karis.
Now that makes sense.
And since we're talking about age, and I'm sharing about myself, I fall into the 45 to 60 range. I know it's hard to tell the baby face, but it's 45 to 60. Looks like 86% have voted. We can give a few more seconds. I think there might be 5 or 6 people that haven't clicked on yet, but everybody may not be able to, because I know people are coming from different devices. There we got, all right, we got 42, so 91% have voted. And it looks like right now, we're largely a white audience. We have a few people that identify as Black and or African American, a few people identified as Latinx, none in the Asian American, Pacific Islander or Native Indigenous, one who declined to share. Then we have, looks like it's mostly female, cisgendered female, I should say. No one identified as trans female or male. We do have two non-binary, and one that declined to answer. And it looks like most of us here are between the ages of 30 to 44. So it looks like, let's see, there's only a couple of people over 60, and then a few people under 30. So that's who we are. This is us. This is us. So I just wanted to, again, kind of fill the room up with who's in the space. I'm not sure how well everybody in this room knows each other. I'd imagine you guys are coming from different parts of the region, but it's good to know who's in the room and how we identify. And again, this idea of identifying intersectionally is a tool for coalition building. It should not be viewed as a tool for discrimination. We have to empower our intersectional identities in ways that are helpful in advancing those who are on the margins. But I know that there's been a lot of times, even in my career, where people have always led me to believe that they were scared to tell people about what their identity was if there was a way they could hide it. And because they were afraid of being discriminated against. And I think we are reaching a time now where we need to flip that on its head and start to use these different parts of us that makes us unique to our advantage in the spirit of coalition. All right, thank you for sharing that. I'm gonna exit out. I don't know I guess you guys can exit out on your own and go back to, let's see if this works. All right. So one of the things that my museum mother, Dr. Janetta Besh-Cole, taught us was, if you want to go fast, you go alone. If you want to go far, you go together. It just makes a lot of common sense, right? I think we are very used to sort of the Western construct of efficiency and moving forward as quickly as possible, and not really thinking about how we got there, or the how we didn't get there, or more importantly, who we left out on the way. And so when we think about a proverb like this in terms of shared partnerships, I think one of the lessons to learn is we have to give each other grace in the time that we're building and cultivating our relationships with one another. It's not something that happens overnight. We're in the time, in an era, in this world where globalization is real, and we're all drinking from water hoses to understand and learn about all these different places and all these different people. So we're not even socialized anymore to sort of take a deep breath and really learn and build and cultivate a relationship with the people who are right in front of us. We are taught to basically look at people and read them based on their last name, their phenotype, and maybe the way they dress. And we've just kind of come up with the whole dissertation of who that person is or is not. And that is something that's always going to be a barrier. And I think what it gives me pause to kind of share with you all is to make sure that we are taking our time, that we're building out this cultivation of partnerships so that it will allow us to get to know one another and really to build on an impactful plan that is really rooted in intention and rooted with specific goals that are agreed upon by both parties, or if there's more than two parties, all parties. All right, so let's see if this works. Do we all know how to share? I don't know if we do. Let's see if we can learn from these two people. I'm going to move it up to here. So you may see an object, a yellow object that they are kind of going back and forth on. And one person's getting upset, the other person's trying to pass it back to them. And now the person has it, right? Now, what are you going to do? How are you going to share your authority? Let's pretend that yellow object is the shared authority that we all seek. How are we going to share that? But right now, one person just kind of hogging it. All the other partner gets to do is just look at it. And now look, the partner is all disengaged, kind of still looking at it, but not sure. The other partner who actually has it is going to the length of actually putting it behind him so he can't even give it to her. This is what happens with grown people. We do this to each other, and this is not how we share. And so those wonderful people were my twin boy and girl many moons ago. They're now 9 years old. And it's always awesome to see, if anybody gets a chance who had the opportunity to be around twins, is a twin or raised twins, you can see when we talk about sharing things in real time, it's just amazing what you learn. And I think for me, sharing that with you all is just that this is something that we actually have to practice. I don't think it's innate in all of us to learn how to share our power, our privilege, our authority. We have to kind of learn how to do this, and it should be a social learning moment so that we can grow in this work together. And it's going to take time, and it's going to be able to build coalition, build consensus, so we can move forward on the different things that we want to partner together on. So here's a quote from Nick Sacco, who works at the National Park Service. Rather than solely relying on the expertise of trained professionals to interpret and represent all voices of the past in public spaces, cultural institutions such as museums, historical societies, community centers, and libraries, now actively seek the input of local community members in a shared endeavor towards interpreting the past. So the idea is here that we are not going to operate from this ivory tower anymore. We were not going to enter into these spaces as experts. We're not going to enter these spaces flaunting off our privilege unless we're going to use our privilege to support somebody else so that they can have some authority in this space. We want to get down from the ivory tower, lock arms with the people who are boots to ground, and really build out whatever objective we have within our nonprofits that we're working on. With museum spaces and art spaces, a lot of that has to do with giving voice to the cultural production and the historical legacies of the communities that we serve. And that can't happen from a tower. That can't happen as an outsider. You have to be immersed in the community and be a part of it. So a lot of what drives my work is sort of the idea that Lonnie Bunch the Smithsonian Secretary speaks about a lot, which is that we don't want to just be community centers. We actually want to be centers of the community. And that means that we are part of the community. And so although we refer a lot of times to our community members and different stakeholders as partners, as if they were something different from us, we have to really lock arms with this. And this really goes over the lines of not just like geographic community. If you are a community of art centers and you are a building community around advancing the art world, that also counts as well. And so it's not just based off of geographic communities, it's built off whatever you define as community, and that you cannot continue to speak from a higher level down to people, that we have to actually be on the same level together. Because honestly, if we're doing this work correctly, we are already driving from the culture production, the historical legacies, and just the grassroots organizing of these communities. So instead of just trying to highlight them, instead of just trying to bring them in for one program and never seeing them again, we want to start to build out and cultivate those relationships. And those things, again, take time. You're going to hear me say that a few times. I wanted to stop right there just for a moment to see if anybody had a burning question about anything that I posed so far before I continue. I know that there's a chat happening, and there's the ability, I think, to unmute maybe. Or Sherry, I think you can raise your hand. That's what I meant to say. If you could raise your hand. All right, seeing that there are none, I'm going to continue down the road here. So one of the things that when I think about shared authority in particular, I think about the relationships I've had with the agencies that I work for, with like foundations and friends groups and other advisory boards, governing boards. And the idea that boards versus staff, or boards versus the community, there's sort of this sort of insider outsider binary between ownership versus stewardship. And I think a lot of times we take pride in the fact that we may, quote unquote, own something, but we don't spend a lot of time talking about how we steward something. And there is a difference. There is a difference. So when we talk about owning something, we're talking about like the act or right of possessing something. You know, you have a right to possess something, and that's what you're going to stand on in the relationship. And that's your approach. That's your entree into this relationship as a partner, that you are possessing something that you own. And what that kind of positionality allows for is sort of this I'm in charge. Like, you don't have a right over this. I'm in charge. And some of that is, a lot of that is problematic when we're talking about partnerships, because when you start to, if the first thing that comes out of your mouth, or if there's a reoccurring rhetoric coming out of your mouth talking about that you have to convince somebody that you're in charge, then you're probably not in charge. So the whole idea of being in charge around these things is not really what the positionality we want to take when we want to really build and cultivate relationships and partnerships. We want to have a shared authority. We want to be able to steward whatever this thing is, whether we're talking about collections, whether we're talking about the relationships that we're building within the communities, whether we're talking about relationships we're building with each other as staff and or board. We want to be able to take care of each other. And again, when you're an owner, the accountability ends up only being on yourself. And so when we talk about a partner, we want to increase our capacity as partners. We want to be able to create this synergy that happens when two or more entities come together for a common cause. And so the idea is not to just come into this space and be accountable to yourself. I mean, certainly if you have a partnership, you might have certain things that you agree upon in terms of what your role is and what the other entity's role is. That is undeniable in a lot of these partnerships. But the idea is that regardless of what your role is and what the other partner's role is, you are both accountable for the final product, for the deliver whatever objective you're seeking to achieve. So doing a good job with yourself in mind first is not what we want for stewardship. We don't want for you to think about yourself only. This is really, really hard to break out of, as we're socialized to organize our agencies very differently. We're always looking out, well, how does it make our agency look? How does this make our nonprofit look? How does this make our cultural center look? And the idea is that if we're in if this is in the context of a shared partnership or shared authority, then we want to make sure that we are both mutually looking good together, and that we are doing whatever we can to work together, to collaborate, to make sure that that happens for the sake of the partnership. But obviously, the partnership exists because you want something to improve, whether that is to do better programming, to have more inclusive interpretation, to whether it is to increase your revenue and the types of things that you are bringing in to add money to your coffers. All those things go towards that. And then again, when we talk about ownership, it's harder to let go of the possession. Sometimes there are times when you are in a partnership, and if you're an owner, you want to own this whole thing. And sometimes there are going to be instances where partnerships may not be good anymore, and it's going to be harder for you to let go if you have that in mind. And sometimes this context of this last bullet is really thinking about like a possession, like an actual material culture, an object, maybe an art piece, maybe it's equipment that helps you run your nonprofit. But the idea is that it's going to be harder for you to let go of those things because you have a possessive attitude in this case, and not necessarily a shared attitude when it comes to this partnership. And so when we look at stewardship, we're really thinking about the focus is taking care of something, taking care of executing your mission, whatever that mission may be, and making sure that you've been put in charge. That means that whatever that you're doing, whatever role that you have in achieving that goal, that role was delegated to you based on collaboration, communication, and a discussion that you mutually came together and agreed upon. This is not something that you are forced to do, and certainly this shouldn't be something you're forcing upon anybody else. And then again, of course, the idea with accountability, it's a little bit different now with stewardship, is that you want people, you want to be accountable to others first. You really want to consider how this will affect your partner or partners in your decision making. Doing a good job with others in mind first also falls true to the same, and constantly prepare for someone to take over. This is really important when we're talking about partnerships and shared authority, because a lot of times when you're an owner of something, there is no succession planning for that partnership. There is no next step. And so if somebody decides the partnership is not good anymore, and but there's still somebody, but the other party still has that same goal in mind for the future, then there's been no plan to bring in a new partner. There's been no plan to really have succession planning, to really find a new way to execute that. Maybe there's going to be a new exchange around what the roles are in terms of the partnerships that you are entering in together. And so it's really important to really start thinking about our organizations in a way where we are stewarding even our staffs and our board. That one of the things that I learned in the leadership program I was a part of a long time ago, which was, if you are hiring managers, the first thing that you should tell your managers to do is to identify someone on your staff that can take your position and start to cultivate them. And that's how we start to really organically create this space of succession planning. But what happens when you're an owner, you're sort of so focused on hoarding in, on being a leader of that unit, that nonprofit, that division within that nonprofit. You're not even thinking about how to cultivate your staff. And you're thinking about me first, when you really should be thinking about others first. It's basically part of what most of us know about, which is called a servant leader, that model. I'm going to stop again one more time to see if anybody has some questions about ownership versus stewardship. All right. It's clear as mud. It's all right. We're going to keep going. So this is just sort of you always try to work off of definitions when we're talking about these things, but partnership, joint stewards, usually involving close cooperation between parties, having specified and shared rights and responsibilities. So it's really important for us to understand our role as stewards and then this joint. I've certainly seen situations where we've had friends groups who, a lot of times put a lot of blood, sweat, and tears to make sure that they advocated for that historic site or for that museum. And certainly this may have happened in some cases a decade ago, some cases 30, 40 years ago. And for many different reasons, that same friends group has not necessarily evolved with what they're doing in their advocacy. And so what was good 30 or 40 years ago in terms of them being an owner and them sort of having to hold that agency accountable that they're partners with to making sure they're steward, it doesn't hold true anymore because of all the good work that the agency gets to stand on, because now they have the staff, now they have the budget, now they have the relationship with the community. And so now we have to really consider how our new partnership may change, because now we're not talking about joint stewardship anymore, because sometimes when you have a friends group who's been around that long and the leadership hasn't changed, there's no really stewarding. It's really ownership. You own everything and you think you own it because of the great work you did before. But we have to always realize that these partnerships, our roles in the community, even how we approach our missions should always be evolving with the times and the considerations that we have in front of us. Nobody could have predicted what we went through this last year. And so we have to always keep that in front of mind. I think I saw something in the chat, but it's not okay. No question, but this is extremely helpful from Stephanie Plummer in understanding why founder syndrome could be such an issue. Yes, indeed, Stephanie, that is true. I've been on boards with founding directors, and it is a hard thing to shake, but it is shakeable. It is shakeable. It's all about how much you care about executing your mission. If you really care about executing that mission, you will slowly but surely start to let those things go. So we've heard this analogy, this metaphor a lot, a seat at the table. And I think it's maybe slightly, I won't say overused, but used plenty. But I think I want to dig into it with you all one more time, because I think a lot of us grew up on Peanuts, Charlie Brown, Snoopy, and this picture, that they say a picture is 1,000 words, worth 1,000 words. And here you have, Linus at the table here, and all of the white members of the Peanuts family sort of sitting around the table, and then the one black member of the Peanuts family, Franklin, over here by himself. Now, I don't know who drew this picture, but I clearly see the message, right? You can have a seat at the table. You can bring in partners. You can bring in strategic partnerships for audiences that that you've been woefully neglectful of. And if you are in that boat, you're not the first one. And unfortunately, you may not be the last one for a little while until we can continue to work on this together as a community. But right now, you see Franklin at the table. But if you see, look at where Linus's gaze is casted. Totally looking at the three over on to my right, his left probably, and not really paying attention to Franklin, and arguably not paying attention to the character sitting across the table from either. And so this idea of having a seat at the table is really one-fold, and it's not just being able to be there, but you actually have to have agency in what you're doing. So I wanted to kind of pause for 1 second, and I know I pointed out a few things, but was there anything else anybody noticed here? I see, let me check the chat. In defining terms, what distinctions a seat at the table can be so tokenizing. Yes, yeah, absolutely. Thank you for acknowledging that, Noelia. Does anybody have any other questions or comments based on the seat at the table metaphor? I see that Andrea said, in defining terms, what distinctions do you make between partnerships and collaborators? Wow. Well, I mean, I don't make a strong distinction, but in that, as you ask that question, I mean, what comes to mind is I feel like collaborators is a little bit more of a action. It's more actionable. I mean, you can be partners that really have very little activity between you two, right? I mean, I've seen people partner and they slap each other's logos on their website, and then once you dig in further about how much they partner, they haven't done anything to get together in the last 3 or 4 years. With a collaborator, for me, it sounds like you're much more in the trenches with one another, that you're meeting frequently, that you're planning, that you have a common goal. But that's just something that came off the top, because I never really considered the difference, to be honest with you. All right. So proximity. So many of you may be aware of Brian Stevenson, the founder of the Equal Justice Initiative. He's done a lot of great work in combating the plague of mass incarceration in our country. He's also gone into the museum world and started the Legacy Museum, as well as the Memorial of Peace and Justice of those who've been lynched across our country. And I believe he opened up a third thing this January called the Legacy Pavilion, which looks like it's another space for exhibitions. And he talks a lot about proximity. And I think proximity is important. It goes back to where I started earlier, because in order for you to partner and cultivate your relationships with people, you have to develop some level of proximity, some level of closeness. Now, that's a very, very difficult thing based on what we have just gone through and are going through in the last year. We've been able to find new ways through Zoom, like we're doing now, and just more frequent Zoom meetings, which we all know we're worn out about. And hopefully I'm not wearing you out too much on this one. But the idea is that we really spend some time to gain some intimate closeness. And he says, you can't understand most of the important things from a distance, Brian. You have to get close. And that was actually Rosa Parks speaking to Brian Stevenson and giving him some sage advice. And think about it. I mean, our grassroots organizers from beginning of time have always understood that in order for you to build that partnership, to build those coalitions of solidarity, that you have to spend some time with one another, and you have to do it through that space and time that you're spending. You have to really get proximate, and it's really an important part of my work. I really have worked extremely hard to get to know the partners and the communities that I've worked with, whether it be a geographical community, whether it be a professional association, whether it be a regional community or an affinity group, to spend time with folks, to get to know what's on their minds, to get to know what they care about, to see how it aligns with the things that I care about. And from that magic, that proximity, then we really start to gain some synergy across the things that we want to achieve together. So one of the things I wanted to ask you all about when we look at this picture is, you see these women, but what are you really seeing here? I mean, what do you see these women doing in this field? What do you think that they're up to, is my question to you. And I want to keep the picture up, so I'm not going to stop sharing, but if somebody wanted to raise their hand or put something in the chat, I want to know what you guys see. Okay, I see something come up in the chat. Uh-oh, it's not letting me see it.
It says someone said planting rice, perhaps.
Planting rice, right? The idea is that they are planting rice and they're cultivating something, right? And now what I want you to really pay attention to, now that you understand what it is that they're doing, is they're bent over backwards, spending scrupulous time planting these seeds and harvesting the crops. All that takes work. Sometimes it's actually backbreaking work, right? And here's where I want you to think about when you think about cultivation, because here's where it's usually easier for nonprofits to think about it. Think about the time that you spend with your donors. Think about the time that you spend wooing some of your individual donors. Think about the time that you spent on writing that extensive grant piece. You are cultivating those relationships with that foundation, that individual donor. You're cultivating these relationships with your board, whether it be an advising board, a fundraising board, a governing board, or some hybrid of all three. You are spending time. That's why in agencies and organizations that are big enough and have the privilege to have the staff, you have directors of development and even a staff of development people to continue that cultivation. I wonder how much better would we be if we cultivated all of our partnerships in the same way, especially when it comes to engaging new audiences and new communities through strategic partnerships. Are we just kind of inviting them to the seat at the table like they did Franklin? Or are we actually spending time with them, being proximate, being intentional, being vulnerable, sharing our concerns, sharing our resources when it's appropriate, and really starting to see the intersections between what they want to do and what we want to do. And hopefully, though, you'll find something that's mutually beneficial to really plant that seed of synergy that we want to create together. But the idea here is for me to share with you is that cultivation is not something that you just do in a cold email that you send somebody. Cultivation takes work. Cultivation takes time. Cultivation takes being humble. Those are the types of things that we really need to see from our nonprofits and art centers, museums, and the like, where we're reaching out to these communities, especially the ones that have been marginalized for these so many years. I mean, some of our organizations, unfortunately, have really turned their backs on audiences in certain parts of the community. And now in this racial moment that we're in, are starting to realize that they were wrong and having authentic repentance about what they did or did not do. And now it's going to be hard because now they want to do the right thing. You want to do the right thing and cultivate that relationship, but it has to be a cultivation. It has to be coming to a space as a co-steward. It cannot be paternalistic, right? It has to be that you spend the time with them, understand what their needs are, share with them what your needs are, and try to find that intersection so you can plant that seed of synergy. So here are some examples from the museum world. The Anacostia Community Museum is, a legendary space in Washington, D.C. that belongs to the Smithsonian Institution, or is part of the Smithsonian Institution. It has been around since 1967. It is started off as the Anacostia Neighborhood Museum, and then later was changed to the Anacostia Community Museum. It's always rooted their work in community, in particular the community of Southeast Washington, D.C., Ward 7 and Ward 8. They are located in Ward 8. And one of the things that its founding director, John Kennard, did was he always was listening to what the community needed. He was a grassroots organizer. You'll notice if you spend any time looking at a lot of culturally specific museums, most of the time those museums are not founded by scholars and museum professionals. They're founded by activists. And John Kennard was an activist. He was an activist through his church. He worked in Operation Hope, which is a program that preceded Peace Corps. He did a lot of different types of grassroots work. And so in his engagement with the community was, well, what type of exhibitions do you need to hear from us about? Well, one of them was the Lorton Reformatory, Beyond Time in 1970, that was actually developed in collaboration with the men incarcerated at Lorton, because a lot of those men, although Lorton is in Virginia, came from the Washington, D.C. area, primarily Ward 7 and Ward 8. And so he was able to make a connection to them with his staff and was able to really create this exhibition together that really really spoke to the experience of what it is to be incarcerated as a Black male, even during those times. And really, this kind of sort of precedes this is sort of like the beginning of mass incarceration. And so you can only imagine how relevant those stories were from back then to now, as this industrial complex has continued to grow. Then we have James Madison's Montpelier. So this is the exhibition called The Mere Distinction of Color. So this offers visitors this unique opportunity to hear the stories of those enslaved in Montpelier told by their living descendants, and explores how the legacy of slavery impacts today's conversations about race, identity, and human rights. And one of the wonderful things is that this was really like 20 years in the making, because they started cultivating a relationship with the descendants of the enslaved of James Madison's Montpelier, which is those who haven't figured it out yet, is the home of James Madison, one of our presidents. And they started to really reinterpret the space with this mere distinction of color, from the giving voice to those descendants. They reached out to them around the mid-90s and started to have meetings with them and started to get to know them and get their concerns. Then they kind of connected them to, they have a very strong public archaeology program, and they were starting to invite those members to the archaeological digs, and they would basically unearth their history, literally, and were finding things that were connected directly to these descendants. And so as a result of all that work, they have this award-winning exhibition called The Mere Distinction of Color that's, I believe, still up in the house in James Madison over there in Orange, Virginia today. So this is a project that I played a small role in Puerto Rico, called Camino A Loiza. And Loiza, for those who don't know, is an area in Puerto Rico which is pretty much part of the metropolitan area of San Juan. It's sort of just east of the airport on sort of the northeast part of the island. It is a space and place where many Africans upon emancipation went to settle. And you know, for those who don't know, in Puerto Rico, the emancipation was in 1873. And what you're looking at in the picture here is called La Plazoleta, La Plaza. And what's interesting about this picture is that my parents told me they used to come to that space for festivals, because they have a huge festival, patron festival in Loiza. Loiza has just been one of the most, probably the best, one of the better places in Puerto Rico to find the culture keeping of African contributions to the island. But certainly, let me dispel any myth that there are Black people all throughout Puerto Rico, not just Loiza. And they went to this place to laugh and have a good time and dance, and come to find out that this was a slave block. This was an area where they sold and bought slaves. And this is something that we were unearthing with Camino A Loiza. And this was a project, again, that was done in collaboration with the community to continue to unearth these legacies. And then what we did further was we started to talk to the community and see what was going on. This is post Maria that I started jumping into this. Actually, I was like 6 months after Maria, and I went down there and we were talking to the community, and we had some culture keepers down there who had already were already members of the community, have already done a lot of the legwork. And obviously one of the things is the economy. That's one of the huge issues. So then part of the Camino A Loiza is to not just do this public history with these markers and these historical pieces, but also to create a creative economy around art, artisanship, performance, and public history, and kind of make this a whole umbrella economy that the people of Loiza could take advantage of and continue to sustain themselves, as the whole island was still rebuilding as a result of the destruction of the 2 hurricanes. So shared authority and coalition building are not events. They're evolving protocols that put us in a position to create space for voice and visibility for the unheard and unseen. What I wanted to share with you today were these concepts. And I know a lot of times when we get into these spaces, especially when we have these short time, people are looking for, practical solutions. And believe me, no one is more sensitive about taking theory to praxis than I am. But I just wanted to tell you that although we didn't get into deep dive praxis today, a lot of that should be heavy lifting that you're able to do with your communities, because you're going to be able to build your own protocol. You're going to be able to develop these protocols and how you work with the community. And what you build today is not what's going to exist next year, because you're going to be a mindful co-steward, joint steward with your partners, and always hold the protocol accountable, which means you're always going to be assessing what worked, what didn't work, and continue to build out from there. And so the idea that I would sit down here and teach you in the time that I had, a praxis or a protocol that you can walk through and just cut and paste is really unreasonable. But what is very reasonable and even more possible and even really more enriching to you all is that you're able to take some of these concepts and apply them and start to really work with the audiences and the communities that you want to partner with, so that you can create these protocols together to do things that work for you based on that intersection that you have identified and planting that synergistic seed. Again, evoking the great Dr. Cole, faced with what seems like an impossible task, a group of folks will do well to remember the other African proverb, which is, when spider webs unite, they can tie up a lion. I want to thank you all for your time. If you wanted to, especially the Texas Association of Museums and the Mid-America Arts Alliance for this Engage program, what you see on the screen are my social handles. If you wanted to stay in touch that way and share your good work with me, I'd love to continue to build and cultivate a relationship with you. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen to see if anybody has any questions for me. Thank you.
Omar, thank you so much for the presentation. Again, I want to encourage you all to ask questions. I think we may need a part 2 where we deal with some practical examples. I think the concepts, you've laid a great foundation for people to get a better understanding about shared partnerships and shared authority. And I think, with a lot of things that people are encouraged to do now with social justice commentary is, that first step seems even more frightening than traditionally before. And the reality of the matter is that our communities have an expectation from us in the museum and nonprofit world that we will have already started figuring it out. And so what we want to make sure that we're able to do is equip you all with some of the tool and technique building skills to also do that. But you have to lay the foundation, and you've laid a great foundation and began to, I remember watching Peanuts and Charles Schultz drawing all that. And, Franklin was my homeboy, and I never even crossed my mind that he was alone on that side of the table. On some level, as a kid, I was just excited to see him at the table. And on some level, I think that's symbolic of our partnerships. Just at the table, when not being invited for so long seemed like an accomplishment, now the needle on the bar is set so much higher. Now our communities are expecting not only a seat, but a voice, and to be valued the same way any other community or partner would be, no matter sort of their station. So I want to thank you again for all of that. And again, open it up. Karis, I don't know if there are questions in the chat. As you can see, I'm in my external office right now.
There are no questions in the chat. However, I'm encouraging anyone to ask any questions, or if you have a scenario in which you would like Omar's feedback, that could be great. So feel free to ask that as well.
I see in the chat that Andrea put she's interested in hearing if others use community partnership agreements or have examples. Yeah, I'd love to hear from you all too. For me, right now in my current position, we have I think at least 4 friends groups that we have our community, something like a community partnership agreement with. A lot of them are very old agreements. And so we've been working on revamping them to make them mutually beneficial. Again, so in the spirit of joint stewardship, for us to do this work together, we want to make sure that whatever we agree to as partners, that we hold each other accountable, and that we also consider all the new happenings in the museum field, and maybe we have a different capacity to do certain work. Maybe it's greater, maybe it's smaller, and maybe those are ways that the friends groups can fill in the gaps if they themselves have the capacity. Again, I'll be honest with you, we had one of our friends groups actually dissolve this past January. One that has been around for many years, and part of it was, quite honestly, was that they aged out. Like they didn't do anything, or they didn't have success. I won't say they didn't do anything. They didn't have success in cultivating new members, bringing in new members, and basically they almost had the same group that they had 30 or 40 years ago, which I think we all understand mathematically is not sustainable. And so they just reached out to us early January and said, hey, we're too old, and we really don't have the time to do this anymore. And so they dissolved their friends group. Does anybody have any examples they wanted to share with the group? Then examples like Andrea is asking for? I don't see any other examples. Anybody raising their hand? But if you
camera off, or if you want to put it in the chat directly in a private message to Karis, because you want to share the scenario, but you may not want it necessarily associated with your institution, you're also welcome to do that.
And Patricia asked a wonderful question. Any tips on how to deal with board members entrenched in ownership? I come from being a member of the board myself. I hear that, Patricia. Thank you for that question. I think a lot of this, again, has to deal with what is your goal? What is your objective? How has your mission been executed? And I think no matter how successful our institutions and our nonprofits are, we've all been challenged in this new moment, because what these intersecting pandemics have done has exposed inequities that really have existed for many lifetimes in this country. And so, although pre-COVID we sort of had a certain standard of what success looked like, what success was, I think people are starting to realize they have to come up with a new rubric of how they even assess their success. And so, with that being said, I think if you're talking to board members that are entrenched in ownership, we have to start asking really probing questions about how is that serving the mission, and or how is the current mission serving the institution, and maybe we need to even change the mission. I know a lot of organizations across the country are going through strategic planning right now because people are in a new moment. And they understand that we cannot continue to do the work that we did, March 12th, 2020, whenever the date was for you, and continue to do that same work when we start to reopen now in March 25th, 2021. And so we understand we have new audiences where we have literally a whole country that's been traumatized for many different reasons, many different traumas all across the board. And so we have to really start to challenge our staff, our fellow board members on how is this ownership trope worked for us, and how is it going to work for us in the future as we seek to partner with all these audiences, especially if they're audiences and communities that you have not partnered with in the past. All right, I see. Let's see. I see Kate says, not example of partnership agreements, but one organization I work with has organized a diverse delegate/advisory group of artists who are paid for their time to assist with consulting and planning for the org. They are positioned as equals to the board and work with an advisor who is not the founder or staff. And she says a part 2 would be great. Oh, I guess referring to what Kelly was saying, that there are lots of processes in motion with organizations. I work with who are working to engage communities, but of course there are gaps, blind spots, etc. It would be useful to be able to dig in and discuss different approaches and action steps. Absolutely. I mean, there's definitely a deeper dive that we can do around that. There are some existing protocols, and some of the ones that are there are ones that really can be tweaked for your needs. And that's sort of what I'm alluding to, is that, like, you know, I can slap protocols on you to death, but at the end of the day, like, you're gonna have to take this protocol, give it some thought with your staff and with your board, and then bring in, you know, your partners and give it some more thought, because it's going to have to be tweaked for whatever goals you have in mind. And there's no one size fits all type of thing. I just think that there's certain things that we have to consider, which is why I focused on things like proximity and cultivation and the difference between, you know, stewardship and ownership. Those things I think can help frame a protocol.
Anyone else? I know it's a lot to process. I mean, that's the great thing about presentations like these. They give you so much information, and it causes you to sort of think back and reflect on your own practice. And then I'm going to say thank you and good night. Everyone's going to get off, and you're like, well, now I know what I want to ask. And then, voila, the ship has sailed. So you did provide your information. We will also make sure that this presentation is on our website, Mid-America Arts Alliance website, so you all can access it just to follow up. And again, Omar said he's available for questions. If for some reason you didn't get his contact information when he shared his screen, please reach out to us and we'll ensure that we connect you all. And I have to apologize to Omar for the public pressure on a part 2, because he's incredibly busy, and I know he is. But I said it, I meant it. So now we just got to work on finding time to really follow up. And that's where I would like to invite all of you that are participating. If you want to send us information about the types of scenarios or the type of situations, you know, that a friend that you know, doesn't have to be you, someone you know, or allegedly you've heard, and you'd like some kind of feedback, that would also help us make sure that when we work with Omar to craft a part 2, that we're able to dig in some real life examples well in advance. So he can ensure that he can also pull in the type of resources that would serve as examples for all of us here. Yeah, so I see a lot of things going on. Okay, so we are saving the chat if you are putting information. Karis also put the engage email in. So if there aren't any other questions, last call. I want to thank all of you for joining us. I hope you'll join me in giving Omar a reaction, thumbs up, or clapping hands. Those are clapping, not praying, right? Clapping hands, or yes, just no tears. We'll take hearts, no shock, because, you know we know this. It's always just good to hear and have it confirmed. But Omar, thank you so much for taking the time to really, again, engage in the act of creating shared languages, because the only way that we can begin to have a conversation that ends up in results is that we have all agreed on some of the same terms and how we speak about it. So thank you again, everyone, for joining us, and pay attention to your email. We may send you a brief survey to learn more. But in addition, if you have more questions or like more information about other things that we do not hesitate to reach out to us. Thank you again.
Thank you, everybody, for inviting me in this space. This was wonderful to be with you. I look forward to hearing from you.